Babe Ruth was a big, fat German failure, written by Khatzumoto, posted in March of 2009. If you read enough personal development books, you will eventually come across mention of one of the most profoundly meaningful statistics in the history of sports. That statistic being that for many years, Babe Ruth simultaneously held both the career home run, 714, and strikeout, 1,330, records. Crazy, huh? It's almost as if he was trying to become a living object lesson. Remember, he didn't have a lot of strikeouts. He held the strikeout record. He failed more than anyone else at hitting, not just for a couple of months, but over his entire career. We are talking about a professional, by the way, a person whose job it was to play baseball. Notice how he had a 3-digit home run count and a 4-digit strikeout count. He struck out almost twice as many times as he hit a touchdown. Wait, he was the best because he was the suckiest. He succeeded the most because he failed the most. What does this mean? It means, to paraphrase Anthony, son of Robbins, that massive failure is the key to success. Michael of Jordan said it himself. Quote, "The ring cannot be destroyed. Gimli, son of Glowin, by any craft that we here possess. I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed." End quote. Even some random guy from some random organization called International Business Machines said it. Quote, "If you want to succeed, double your failure rate. The ring was made in the fire of Mount Doom. Only there can it be unmade." End quote. Now, I've heard all these quotes so many times that they don't really grab me anymore when I read them. But let me illustrate using my favorite person, me, as yes, that is narcissistic, example. I am a failure. At this writing, my Khatzumoto stats indicate that since New Year's Day 2007, I have done about 58,000 flashcard reps with a retention rate of about 91%, where retention equals a rep score of 3 or above. Sounds respectable enough, but you realize that what this means is that I have failed to correctly read and/or comprehend a Japanese sentence item at least 5,200 times over the course of 2 years and change. Can you imagine tagging those end to end to end to end in a video? That would make a pretty cool low-light reel. More than 5,000 failures. I've been wrong more times than there are stars in the sky visible to the naked eye. Someone please check this. I'm just saying, that's a lot of fails, and if we, royal we, were to start counting from 2004, it would take about 100,000 reps with a similar 90 to 95 retention rate. That means something on the order of 10,000 failures. That's 10,000 times I couldn't correctly read or understand a sentence or phrase in Japanese. I am a failure. And yet, I am very comfortable with both written and spoken Japanese. I can read, write, understand, or say whatever I want or need to. I just got done doing all my taxes without a hitch. Clearly, this scale of failure helped. You'll forgive the focus on SRSing, it's just that it's something that's easy to measure and therefore compare quantitatively. Everybody awesome is a failure. Robbins goes on to discuss the number of times Walter Elias Disney was rejected by banks when he wanted funding for some goofy idea about a studio making full-length cartoons, and the number of times Sylvester Stallone was rejected when peddling the script for some kind of adult-oriented movie involving interracial pairings of sweaty, half-naked men touching each other with leather gloves in front of excited crowds of people. Most people would have given up. Of course, it goes beyond Hollywood. I have friends who won't go ice skating with me because they're afraid of falling. They have fallen 0 times, 0 failures. They have never failed at ice skating, but they also can't skate, at all. In fact, I imagine the best skaters have also fallen the most times. Arguably, a lot of our fear of failure most likely stems from how schools punish it. Schools promote avoidance of failure. This is a recipe for mediocrity. No meaningful success seems to come without hearty doses of failure. Failure needs to be celebrated. It needs to be sought actively. Failure is what needs to be for dinner. I love blaming everything on schools, but then, most of us did spend the greater part of our waking lives from toddlerhood to early adulthood either in school or in preparation to go to school, or traveling to and from school or doing homework for school. Schools have plenty to answer for. They can't bait with compulsory attendance and then switch a learner-parent responsibility forever. They can't keep waiting until someone gets killed and then feign shock at the discovery that they're a breeding ground for violence. I mean, am I the only one who thinks that school shootings are actually surprisingly rare? Off topic, anyway. How can you start failing? I think the thing is simply to find something you can crank at. Find or build a mechanism that allows you to fail a lot. Perhaps 3 figures minimum, possibly and preferably 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 plus. Chances are this mechanism will also allow you to succeed. In fact, it's more or less guaranteed to bring you success. Eventually. You're not a surgeon, so don't strike surgically. In life, whether it's learning a language, building a blog, doing research, applying for jobs, if that's your thing, trying to get good at shooting basketballs, or even doing whatever it is people do to get into romantic entanglements, many people, especially beginners, go for the surgical strike. because they're so afraid of screwing up. There's just one flaw with the surgical strike plan. Only a surgeon can do surgery. Only a highly trained expert with a matured skill set can even hope for a decent result on such paltry time resources. How do you get a matured skill set? By failing. Generally, it would seem that only someone who's missed tons of shots gets to hit consistently. Also, at the risk of adding too many parenthetic asides, actual surgeons of the medical persuasion obviously deal in situations where, how you say in the simple English, failure is not cheap. Then again, I did see something once about robotic practice patients for medical students. So clearly there are efforts being made to make failure cheaper for them, implying that they are also, in essence, trying to fail into success. As a beginner, trying to go for that surgical strike is akin to giving a newborn baby an NES controller and saying, "You have 15 minutes to beat Mario, or else you will never amount to anything, you lacrimatory ball of fat." It's as if beginners were a novice sniper trying to hit a single target using their first and only bullet. That's how most people right now tend to operate. But that's only a viable option if you're statistically a really good shot, which, almost by definition, a beginner is not. No statistics to go off of. Middle school, aka Gattaca Light. Unfortunately, failure to recognize the value of failure happens in sports all the time. Too many people judge and are judged based off their first performance. How many egos have been crushed? Not mine, but people I know. Because of using such a ridiculously small and downward skewed sample. How many doors have been closed to figurative newborn babies? How many Michael Jordans get cut from high school teams? In middle school, I can remember how in both PE classes and interschool sports teams, the time, attention, and resources were disproportionately concentrated on boys and girls who were hitting puberty at 11. And the rest of you kids with your slow-growing bodies could just bugger off. Even though our parents were all paying the same tuition, the sports was not a business. No TV revenue or scholarships like NCAA, not even an effect on enrollment. Now, why this middle school business still bugs me more than 10 years after the fact is because the deafeningly loud silent lesson it taught was that effort didn't matter, and there was no such thing as meaningful development and improvement over time. Only genetic predisposition mattered. Only being 11 years old and having facial hair mattered. It was Gattaca Light. At some level, I can understand the school coach's problem. They needed to make a winning team as quickly as possible. But again, that's not really doing school anymore, if only because nothing profound is being learned. That's more of a professional/club thing where the focus is on execution. As a compromise, a dual sports system might work, with a "we're gonna use you now" short-term competition-centered section for freakishly large children, and a "build your skills now for the future" long-term training-centered section for children who like sports but aren't yet big enough to be useful. Kind of like a separate but equal. Wait a minute! They did kind of try something like that by having multiple teams per age group, but the resource distribution was insulting. Remember, everyone was paying the same overpriced tuition, and the sports teams neither made money nor contributed to name brand recognition. Yet somehow the quote-unquote lower teams were invariably put on the fields that the groundskeeper forgot, using equipment that had been oh so delicately aged to perfection by the finely tuned athletic machines of the higher teams. Where's Lincoln Park and a razor blade when you need them? Cheap and quick. Anyway, in less violent/jockey terms, letting go of the surgical strike philosophy means don't try to write a magnum opus if you can't even write an opus yet. Don't try to write a novel if you can't even write a short story yet. Don't try to run a marathon when you can't even run around the block yet. Whoops, got jockey again. It doesn't take too much perceptiveness to see that the key with failing this much is that you need to make it cheap. Time cheap, money cheap, effort cheap, and emotion cheap. So each round needs to be short, not cost a lot, not take too much energy, not be too crushing to the old dignity. Footnote 1. On the dignity bit, you may just have to let go of your pride. This has always been very hard for me to do, but if the goal is worth reaching, then in some cases it might be worth eating humble pie for. My pride is usually set to off when it comes to languages. I try to mentally revert to the state of a toddler, where curiosity supersedes pride. End footnote. Maybe this cheapness is another reason why small, short, winnable games are so good. A short game can be played many times, which leads to many failures, which leads to lots of success. According to the man himself in the Mindscape of Alan Moore, the best comics writer in the English language before me. Why are you making that face? What is that face? Started out writing 4-page comic stories, said he. Quote, I learned my craft doing very short stories, 3 or 4 pages each, which is an excellent way to learn writing of any sort. End quote. Even Moore Sensei's early stories were likely unbefitting what we've come to expect of the Alan Moore legend. Knowing what we know now, it would probably be easy to see or trick ourselves into seeing the Moore mojo unfolding, but if we were to look at them blind, my gut tells me we'd be somewhat rather unimpressed. Anyway, my point is, he had something he could crank. He had something he could fail at over and over and over again. He had a mechanism he could grind himself on until he got razor-sharp perfection. He practiced with 4-page stories, but matured into a graphic novelist just as you practice with phrases, sentences, and pages as you gradually grow into a fully fledged reader of your L2. Mojo is made rather than born. I remember one time I was at a gaijin friend's house, arranging internet service for him over the phone in Japanese, and then I hung up and he and his roommates, having heard the entire exchange, decided that I had a talent for the language. And frankly, I think I do too. In fact, if you ignore minor details like how I once turned my entire life into a Japanese camp and spent all my disposable income on Japanese materials and severed any human relationship that significantly conflicted with doing Japanese and ate cake with chopsticks and slept with headphones on just to make sure, then yes, it was pure talent. Case in point, why spam works. Not a positive example, but this massive failure business, by the way, is why spam works. Spam has found a mechanism that allows it to fail on a massive scale. This mechanism is called email is fast and free, mother lovers, and what a wonderful mechanism it is. Can you imagine the indignity of paying for email? Forget them apples. Now, most people aren't going to buy into those, how can we be delicate about this, organ enhancement medications they sell in spam, even if my friend needed them, which he doesn't, but if he did, he wouldn't buy them. But someone somewhere always does. When you send out, 1 million emails a day, 365 million emails a year, son, you're bound to get someone to buy it. As long as the probability isn't 0, and in life the probability is almost never 0 or 1, then you are guaranteed that you'll get someone to buy your spam product, even if my friend, were just buying those pills as a joke and didn't really need them and was just testing the system. For a theoretical spammer, even if 99.99% of those 365 million theoretical emails fail, that's still 365,000 theoretical customers in the bag. That's 365,000 people willing to pay cash money for the pills they need to, theoretically, bliss her out with their weapon of mass expulsion. All this talk about massive failure equals success is exciting when we're talking about it here in the squeaky clean, theoretical la-la land we can create for ourselves in the brief window of time when we're reading and writing a post. But back in the real world, when you actually fail, you don't necessarily feel so good. We're not trained to be excited by that sort of thing, and perhaps it's for the best that we aren't. What a bitter Greek tragedy on steroids irony it would be to instantly dislike or fail to recognize the success you had worked for. My personal solution is to largely ignore the immediate failure point at hand and get excited about the overall process function of failing massively. That's how I stay excited and keep going. Individual failure points are easy to feel bad about. As soon as they pass, ignore them. Let them go and focus on the next round. You don't think MS is still crying fits and having sleepless nights over Microsoft Bob, do you? Laughing fits, maybe. There are exceptions. Having said all that, Antimoon's advice to shut up before you hurt yourself, which morphed into my advice to shut up until it comes out correctly and naturally by itself, still holds. Personal development-y advice of the kind that is the subject of this post can seem to run into contradictions because it's so broadly applicable that nobody bothers to provide more rigid domain definition. Suffice it to say that significant exceptions and counterexamples of virtually every principle exist. They may be rare, but they do exist. Try not to go emo when you run into one. Think of these ideas as one of the many tools in your toolbox. They work really well in some cases and not so well in others. In closing. Anyway, enough talk. Mondo muyo. Time for you and I to both hurry up and get failing. And when people tell you to stop it because it won't work and you're crazy, as they probably will, you can think of Thomas Watson's words. Quote, "Dude, a homie flattened by an opponent can get up again. A homie flattened by conformity stays down for good." End quote. Oh yeah, I would love to read your suggestions for little games to fail at, or links to similar discussions, so please feel free to share them.